If you're trying to get lean and stay strong on a plant-based diet, or you're thinking about switching to plant proteins, there are some critical things you need to know to make it work for you. I'm JP, and I help busy people build strength, lose fat, and stay capable for the long run without constantly stressing about food and training. Today we're going to look at a study that's doing the rounds with a pretty eye-catching headline and a few of the other challenges around using plant proteins as your main protein source. So first, let's talk about the study. This study from 2024 that was published in 2025 in the Journal of Nutrition makes the claim that a vegan diet is basically equal to an omnivorous diet when it comes to building and maintaining lean muscle mass for older adults. Now, that claim is not quite correct. When you look at the actual details of the study, the diets used in the study are not actually equal in terms of the amount of protein they provide. The vegan diet provided about 1.3 grams of protein per kilogram of body mass, while the omnivorous diet that was used only provided 1.2 grams per kilogram. Now, when you compare those two numbers, they sound like there's not really that big a difference, only 0.1 grams per kilogram. And the study authors try to dismiss this as being something that could be considered negligible because of that small numerical difference on paper. But when you actually do the math, it comes out to a pretty significant difference of about 8.3% of total protein intake. So that 8.3% difference in intake is what actually makes the end result equivalent between the two. This is something we've actually known for a long time about plant proteins. You need to eat about 10%-ish more grams of protein from plant sources to have the same net effect in your body as animal proteins, because plant proteins are just not broken down and absorbed by our bodies as well. So this kind of, I hesitate to call it misinformation, but let's say misdirection, is actually quite common in studies that are promoting plant-based eating, because they want to set it up so that the plant-based diet is in as good a light as possible. Now, to be clear, I'm not a vegan, but I definitely am in favor of people eating more plants generally. And in fact, I use a plant-based protein powder as part of my own daily intake. And over the years, working with my clients, I've seen more and more of them turn to more plant-based eating for various reasons. So I've had good cause to dig deep on what you need to know to make plant-based proteins work for you. So let's talk about a couple of the other common things that are touted in plant-based eating circles that may not quite be what they're cracked up to be. So one common argument against plant-based eating is that it's difficult to get enough protein from plant-based foods alone. And that's actually pretty true. Now, a lot of proponents of plant-based eating say that this isn't a problem, and they base that on the recommendation of 0.8 grams per kilogram of body mass as the threshold for how much protein you need to have in a day. Now, an important thing to note is that number is actually what's recommended to prevent protein deficiency. So to prevent your body from stripping away your muscle mass, for example, to have the amino acids that it needs to repair other things or to make your immune system function. While it's technically true that they can meet those targets from a plant-based diet fairly easily, if you want to be strong and capable, and to do that, you're strength training 2 to 3 times per week, hopefully, to build and maintain your muscle mass, that's really not enough. So to support that kind of lifestyle, most research recommends double that number, around 1.6 grams per kilogram of body mass, or about 0.74 grams per pound. Remembering that you have to get about 10% more grams of protein from plant proteins versus animal proteins, that means you're actually needing to aim for about 1.76 grams per kilogram, or 0.81 grams per pound as the baseline. And that's what I actually recommend with all of my clients. Another common concern with plant-based proteins versus animal proteins is that the majority of plant proteins are what we consider incomplete, meaning they don't provide all 9 of the essential amino acids meaning those are ones that we can only get from our diet and that our body can't produce enough of on its own. So some examples there, legumes like beans and lentils tend to be really rich in lysine, but really poor in methionine. Grains are the opposite, where they tend to be high in methionine, but low in lysine. So that's where food combinations come into play, where, for example, you might have beans or lentils with rice, or like a chickpea hummus with pita. And there's a number of really delicious cuisines out there, like Indian, Mexican, and Greek, that naturally combine these in some of their classic combinations. So it's not really that big a deal to get them both in the same sitting. And you really don't actually have to do that in the same sitting either. Your body's totally capable of taking, the methionine that you get from your toast in the morning and combining that with the lysine that you're getting from beans at lunch, for example. There are a couple of plant-based protein sources that are actually complete proteins. So a couple that I use personally and that some clients of mine use. One is a soy-free tofu that's made by a local company here in BC called Big Mountain Foods. And it's made from fava beans rather than from soy. So fava beans actually have a complete protein profile. They contain all 9 essential amino acids, though like other legumes, they are a little low on methionine, but they do actually have enough in them so that it can be considered a complete protein. That said, if you're using it, it's a good idea to still have some rice or some bread throughout the day to top up the methionine a little bit. Another way that you can get complete proteins from plant-based sources is to use a plant-based protein powder because they do tend to combine things that end up completing the protein picture. For example, pea protein combined with rice, that sort of thing. So the plant-based protein powder that I use is a brand called Good Protein, which is a Canadian brand as well. And I kind of stumbled across that a couple years back after trying a number of plant-based proteins that were, quite frankly, pretty terrible for one reason or another. For a lot of them, it was the texture. They're very gritty or chalky, and then when you mix them up with water, it was like drinking sand. It was like really not appealing. And I did find that the flavors with a lot of the plant-based proteins were also not great. Either they were just very weak flavored overall, or they had some kind of funky undertones from the plant protein sources themselves. Good protein, on the other hand, I find the texture when you just shake it up with water, if you have your protein powder to water ratio right, is actually pretty good. It's got a nice creamy texture to it, and their flavors are pretty decent as well. So definitely check them out. I'll put links to both Good Protein and the Big Mountain Soy-Free Tofu in the description if you're interested in looking into those. So the other big concern when you're talking about maintaining a healthy body weight or a lean body composition when it comes to plant proteins is the additional calorie load that comes along with those protein sources, because plant proteins tend to also be high in either carbs or fat. So lentils, for example, are a great protein source with 25 grams of protein per 100-gram dry serving, but they come along with 48 grams of carbs. So that's almost double the grams and calories versus the protein content. So you need to be mindful of that when you're using lentils as a protein source. And remember too, that to complete the protein, you need to have something like bread or rice to give the methionine that the lentils are kind of low in. So that's another carb source that's going to add more carb servings. So it can be tricky to maintain a reasonable calorie intake while getting all of your protein from plant-based sources. Another common plant-based protein source is traditional soy tofu. Now, in a 100-gram serving of that, you only get about 8 grams of protein, so it's pretty weak from the protein perspective. But the other problem with that is that it also comes with 5 grams of fat. Now, because fat is more than double the calorie density versus protein, you're now looking at something like 1.5 times the calories from fat versus from protein when you're eating tofu. So this is another area where something like the Big Mountain soy-free tofu actually works quite well because according to the nutrition label at least, it's basically all protein. There's 16 grams of protein in a serving according to the label and 0 grams of fat and 0 grams of carbs. So if you are looking at eating a 100% plant-based diet, that's one good option to look for. The other option, as mentioned before, is topping up your protein intake using a protein or a plant-based protein powder, like the one from Good Protein. Now, almost every plant-based protein powder, or I would actually say every one that I've used, they do have some carbs and fats. It's not like a whey protein isolate where it's going to be 100% protein and no carbs or fats. But if you're like me and you have issues with digesting whey protein, that was kind of my go-to before, but I found after a month or two of intake, it caused some pretty unpleasant stomach side effects, then a plant-based protein powder may be your best option. So again, you just have to account for those extra calories from fat or carbs that come along with the protein content. So there's really three main things you need to be aware of when you're using plant proteins for most or all of your intake. Now I should mention too, if you're just occasionally having plant-based proteins as part of a mostly omnivorous diet, say for instance you're doing a meatless Monday once a week or that kind of thing, you don't really need to worry so much about these details with the plant proteins. Just enjoy those meals when you have them. The animal proteins that you're having the majority of the time are going to fill these gaps that plant proteins have. So you don't really need to worry. I'd say say if your threshold is about say 10 to 20% of your protein intake during the week comes from plant sources, you're probably fine. That said, if the majority of your protein intake is coming from plant sources, then you do need to be mindful of these three key factors that we've talked about. So first, plant proteins are not as well absorbed by our bodies, so we need to eat about 10% more grams of protein in the day. So if you're aiming for 150 grams of protein in the day from all sources, then if it's all plant sources, you should be aiming for 165 grams a day. Second, be wary of the completeness of the protein sources. So you may need to eat certain combinations of foods during your day to balance out the amino acids from legumes with grains, for example, so that you get all of the amino acids that we need to get from our diets. And lastly, the other thing to be aware of when you're trying to maintain a healthy body weight or to change your body composition, you need to be wary of the extra calories that come with a lot of plant protein sources, either from carbs or fats that come along with those sources. So do make sure that you're accounting for those when you're figuring out your total intake. If you're interested in going a little deeper into how weight loss really works, or seeing a little bit of the approach that I take with my coaching clients and with our online courses, there's a couple of free resources that are linked in the description. Feel free to check those out if you like. For now, just remember those three key points if you're delving into plant proteins, and we'll see you in the next video.